So in the word that she offered to us 2 weeks ago on Pride Sunday, Minister Candace Simpson said this: we can build the world that we want to see. This is this is abolition. It's investing in the needs of a community and treating humans with dignity and compassion. It's investing in the little ones, whoever they may be. And Mahalia Jackson sang it in this way: that it don't cost very much to give just a gentle touch, to give a glass of water to a person in need of such. You may not be an angel and you may not go to church, but the good that you do could come back to you, and it don't cost very much. I'd love to linger there this week with this concept of cost. Many of us have been wondering, as policy continues to bewilder us, how much is a life worth? How much are we willing to expend to protect human life? To protect that a person's ability to live free and to live joyously. You may not know the Thomas Dorsey song that Minister Simpson quoted and that was so beautifully sung by Mahalia Jackson in their ongoing collaborations. But at a tribute to Ms. Jackson after her death, Mr. Dorsey said this: it don't cost very much just to say a kind word or say, I enjoyed you. That's if you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, don't say so. And what I love about this beautiful piece of subversive poetry that he wrote is that he starts off quite simply, citing the codes by which we are ostensibly called to live. So this is how the song opens, not the part that Minister Simpson quoted, but the part that comes before it. To smile when you're happy, to smile when you're sad, to look pleasing when mistreated, to be calm when you're mad. Oh, be forgiving if someone abused you, for the good Lord looks for such. Live right each day and smile on your way, and it don't cost very much. And what's interesting is that on the surface, it could look as if he's saying that that's what we're all supposed to do. And I don't know about you, but I think many of us are familiar with these codes. I grew up in the South, I guess, if we call DC that, but also with parents who were Southern and family that was Southern. And we know about how this pleasantness, this sense of joy, this sense, rather, not joy, of being okay even when we're being mistreated, to look pleasing when mistreated. These are the codes of double consciousness. And many of us have had to find ways to hold it together in unsafe spaces while we have somewhere, please God, to let that all out somewhere else. Just not there in that moment, right? And so many of us, especially women of color, especially queer folk, especially people of color, especially Black women, we know how to look pleasing when we're mistreated, to hear the calls to forgive when someone abuses you. And when I say that these are the things we have learned from birth to survive, what I mean is these are the things that we've had encoded into us so that we won't get killed. And may I just say it, the church with a capital C has been writing these stories, these expectations into us since enslavement, and of course before then too, but most certainly in nearly every setting of church since the captors and colonizers sought to implant a code within us that says it don't cost very much. It doesn't take very much to smile when you're abused. It doesn't take very much to look pleasing to your oppressor. It doesn't take very much, we are taught, because the good Lord looks for such, as if these were God's intentions. As if a good Lord would applaud our suffering or would look at the worst nights of our souls and say, yeah, that's where I want you. But But so many of us know that's not true. And I believe Mr. Dorsey was clear in this too, but I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I want to talk to you about prophets. Prophets like Thomas Dorsey, like Mahalia Jackson, like Isaiah Yeshayahu, who by name alone proclaimed that God is salvation. In other words, the word Isaiah in Hebrew, Yeshayahu, translated, proclaims that God is salvation. And the book of the prophet Isaiah is actually quite long. I'm going to do a little exegesis with you. And it's broken up into 3 parts for this reason, because it's difficult to encapsulate the breadth of this prophetic text in any neat sense. But if you listen to the biblical scholars I try to listen to, you'll see that 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Isaiah are broken up into ways that aren't neat, but generally up until about chapter 40, with some exceptions, is what we call 1st Isaiah. Isaiah living in Zion, in Jerusalem, with words and oracles, a prescription that the people don't want to hear. And there Isaiah's work, or Isaiah works God's ultimate power through the powers we see and know, like the powers of the state. And if God is the true ruler, others are just problematic approximations of an unworthy substitute. And when the other rulers are falling short, Isaiah is calling for purification. Now, so that's where we go before we get to this section that our text was in. And then our text was in 2nd Isaiah. In fact, it closes that section of Isaiah. So chapter 55 is the end of 2nd Isaiah. And this is the word to people in exile, as I started to say at the beginning. And these are the people who have had up turned down and who lost everything they knew to revere and to trust in, and they had to build something else from scratch. You heard? Almost nothing they knew held the test of time, and they had to figure out what they were going to hold on to moving forward. And I don't want to assume that you know this history, but just to keep it short, know that in the 6th century before the Common Era or BCE, the people of Zion, of the Zion I just told you about, where they thought their earthly rulers were God's representatives on earth, had their government corrupted and overthrown, and were then exiled into enslavement across the reachable planet, which is how this works, actually, in that pattern, and has worked and continues to work even now. It is an ancient story that still rings true. And God's chosen people were deported, literally, to work camps and death and suffering that so many of us could never imagine. God here in 2nd Isaiah is not just the ruler of the universe, but God is the ruler of the account. In other words, our God, as Isaiah tells us in this, will not forget what the people have endured, nor what the people who had options did to relieve suffering and help the poor. In other words, God is noticing the suffering, and God is noticing those who cause the suffering. And it is to the people in this exile that 2nd Isaiah, the section from which we hear today, speaks. So when the prophet says, "You that have no money, come, buy wine and milk without money and without price, listen so that you may live," it's not in the abstract. It's a word for all of God's people in exile. And I wonder about this exile, because I wonder if actually an overwhelming number of God's people are also living in exile. I wonder if you are living in exile, exiled from the work your bodies and hearts and minds, all in consort, were created to do, exiled from the love for which your spirit yearns, exiled from the soil on which your bare feet can feel the earth as if you were intentionally planted, exiled from the joy, the divinely ordained, heavenly anointed joy that you are intended to experience, exiled from the apartment you need with the rent you cannot pay, exiled from a job you'd adore, but the employer understands themselves to be just a bit less broke than you. And with unemployment soaring, and to the levels of perhaps even the Great Depression, and folks wringing their hands as if there weren't concrete things they could do to fix this. I just wonder what form of exile might you be under? Because even if we're not in a state of physical exile, though many of us are, especially in this pandemic time, we can certainly be exiled from our joy, from our thriving, from the intentions that God has on our lives. And if this is you, hear this prophet's promise as he speaks words God has given him. My word goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose and succeed in the thing for which I sent it. And so God's not concerned, in quotes. God isn't equivocating on your life and your pursuit of joy. God is sending you a word that cannot falter and shall not. Shall is a key word. Shall not fail. Rather, because God is God and light from light and true God from true God and begotten, not made, God shall accomplish that which God has purposed. And that purpose is you and your neighbor and that person you can't stand. We are all conscripted into God's plan, and God has sent a word to help us to find our way, to stay in alignment with that plan. But we fall out of alignment all the time. Each of us does. And then we come back to the table. That table doesn't have a crimson hue. And that table doesn't have a blue check mark next to its name or contracts in jeopardy if we don't handle a situation. That table invites any of those folks, though. And it invites you and I, too, equally, without malice or harm. It just says, come. Come, stop looking for joy in the wrong places. Instead, follow me. Not me. I'm talking about Jesus here. Come. Quit destructive behaviors. Instead, follow me. Come, stop doubting myself because I have never doubted you. And follow me. That's Jesus's message and the oracle to which the prophet points again and again. And we get it wrong. We miss out all the time. But when we miss out, God doesn't skip out. God instead sticks around, knowing that which God has put out there will not miss its target, at least not in ultimate terms. Let's call it the boomerang effect. Now, I'll be honest, like most sports, I never mastered the art of the boomerang. I would just throw the thing and it would fall to the ground. But what I want to help you to understand is that God is saying, I have cast my net. I have thrown it out. And what I have put out will come back to me. There is a cycle in life and in the word and in the gifts I give. They're not meant to fall in one place, but to keep moving like the breath of the Spirit that won't be stopped. For you shall go out in joy and be led back to me in peace. Then the mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all of the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Are the barriers on your path bursting into song? Are the exhausting hills you have to climb singing praises? Can you even imagine this? I know I can't, which is part of what I preached about last week. And that's not surprising because it just means that I don't know peace, and most of us don't. but God does. God knows peace. Yes, I know what a moment of happiness is, but I've never known true joy, not yet. And at all this, Jesus weeps. And God fixes it. God will fix this. God will affix us to our joy. And if we have invested our love, our care, our interest, our energy in God's wealth, that being affixed to our joy, that is God's wealth, the wealth that has no bounds or bank accounts or citizenship and knows no borders, then it doesn't cost much. In closing, I return to the Dorsey song. He who so clearly saw and performed the pivot between the adaptation and the transformation. See, at the beginning of the song, as I discussed earlier, it was about making others feel good about our suffering. Like, enslavement's not so bad. Listen, they're singing. How many times have you heard that lie? But then there's this pivot. And here's where you see me showing my cards as an unapologetic Jesus-following minister. Because the song switches and the chords swell and the passion grows as we see the very markers of faith in the Gospels outlined as the true yoke that is easy and the divine burden that is light. In mutuality, in sharing, in wearing a doggone mask, in offering those canned beans you might not be able to bring yourself to use to a neighbor who needs some delicious canned beans, in investing your funds in interests that do not harm others, in taking the extra steps to purchase from Black businesses and minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses rather than what you can't scratch or search for on that popular platform. The mutuality of living and giving, yes, is currently extra work, though it doesn't have to be in the long term. But work is not the same thing as a heavy yoke. And God calls us to work. God doesn't call us to burden. Instead, God calls us to joy. Go out with joy, be led forth in peace, and whatever tells you otherwise, you tell it to get behind you. In Jesus' name, amen.